everyone. Welcome to Empowering Exceptional Minds, the podcast diving into neurodiversity through real conversations with parents, individuals, and professionals on challenges, strengths, and unique experiences. I'm your host, Maayan Glaser-Koren, an educational therapist, ADHD educator, and ASD specialist. At Educational Therapy LLC, my private practice, we support kids and adults with executive function and learning differences toward confidence and independence. This podcast is a collaboration with Wiz Therapy, connecting individuals to providers and streamlining services for neurodiverse communities. Our goal is to share strategies, stories, and insights to empower families, educators, and professionals. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of this podcast or Wiz Therapy. The conversations here are for information and empowerment, not a substitute for professional or medical advice. And most importantly, if you are experiencing a mental health emergency, please dial 911 immediately, or you can text 741-741 to reach the crisis text line in the US for support. I am so excited. I'm here with Allison, and it's funny because we have a really nice chemistry. We were just talking about it, that we get along really well, and we just met each other recently. So we have a lot in common, and this is super fun. And I really think this episode is going to be very helpful to many of our parents, because we're going to talk about collaboration between parents in the school. And we're going to talk about giftedness. And we're going to talk about the role of screens and what happens with neurodivergent and gifted learners. So I'm not going to talk that much. And just letting you know, we are both very energetic. So it takes a lot.
Is this your disclaimer?
This is my disclaimer. We are both very energetic, even though we both just kind of release some energy from our bodies because gym and horse riding, right?
Yes.
I need to kind of remind myself to chill and breathe. And you see, this is when energy is feeding each other, and this is super fun to be with a person that kind of understands you and your crazy energy. So, Allison, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Okay. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. And it was so fun to have that first conversation to learn more about what educational therapy is. I'm fascinated. I know your listeners already know a lot about it, but we will probably get into that again today. For anyone who is new to you, I hope. Who am I? I am a mom of two boys. I think that's where we started out with, it's two boys, and that leads to a certain dynamic in the household. Mine are older than yours. Mine are 17 and 20. And it has been a very interesting ride. And I think I'm grateful for a sense of humor in order to meet them exactly where they are, and also meet schools exactly where they are, hopefully, and to create a partnership between, this is what we're going to talk about today, between the parents and the schools. But I started out as a scientist. I am an epidemiologist by training, so I love data and I like to think intuitively about data. And the driving force behind that is understanding the population that we're serving who is not getting their needs met and why. So barrier analysis. So I used that in health, primarily in preventive health, getting screenings and vaccines and things of that nature. So who is not coming in, say, for their first trimester prenatal visit, and what barriers are affecting those folks and how can we reduce them? So that's how an epidemiologist tends to think, is in populations and distribution curves. And when my kids entered school, I was really surprised that school was not a good fit for them, because my kids are super curious, and we'll get into this, I'm sure. But that led me to learn more about education, education policy, the education system. And I started applying my epidemiologic sort of framework to education and understanding distribution curves within the classroom. One teacher has a whole bunch of needs in the classroom. And there are some kids who are getting their needs met if they're kind of in the mean. And there are kids who are not getting their needs met on either side of that distribution curve. And so it's a real challenge for the teacher. And that led to just more than, the older one is 20. So like more than a decade, 12 to 13 years of real immersion in school, in education policy, and in trying to collaborate with schools to meet the needs of these interesting people who are on one end of the distribution curve where they're generally more advanced than the material being offered in school. We were just talking about food and feeding young men. And so thinking about educational needs and intellectual needs is very similar to meeting their nutritional needs. And if we're not meeting their nutritional needs, there are behavioral things that come up. Or if we're feeding them the wrong things. And those are just the symptoms. The behaviors are just the symptoms of an underlying need that's not being met. And so I just got kind of fascinated with what's going on here. I mean, these are bright people and school is not working. So how can we better approach this? And trace that all the way out to where I am today. I'm also now a professional mindset and high performance coach. First of all, to make me a better partner and spouse, and also a better parent for my kids, because at the very end of our school journey with the older one, he just was completely done, and school felt like a prison. And it was all we could do to get him in the door in the morning and just to get that high school diploma, which he told me he did not even need to do what he wants to do, which was, believe me, a shock to a parent. What, you don't even need a high school diploma? You don't even want a GED? What? And you're the person with 36 college credits already done and you've already accelerated a year? Like, why wouldn't you want this marker that you're done now and you're moving on? School had become so profoundly meaningless to him by then that he didn't want any part of it. So I became a coach to better understand how to interact with him, how to support him in that new phase of being an adult, being responsible for his own learning. And he was only around 16 at the time that I started this. So it's been a journey. And I am so thankful for throwing my butt back in school, in the very best coaching school I could find to help me really radically shift from being a project manager, and a good one, and a compassionate one, and an empathetic one, to a team member, somebody who really approaches my young people, my young men, with respect, with an appreciation for their profound need for autonomy, for agency, and devising their own plan. And I sure wish that I had had some of this knowledge and training and communication skills training years ago. I did my best, but now I'm offering these sorts of things to other parents who really are at loggerheads with their kids and they don't want to be. They want to have a loving and amazing relationship with their kids. And my two boys would say I'm very much a work in progress, but things are good, and I'm really, really grateful to be here where we are and enjoying family life together again and really minimizing the number of battles around school related things.
We are all work in progress.
Yeah.
Your mindset and like how you approach challenges that many of us see in the school system is really interesting. I never talked to somebody who had this kind of like understanding of how to look on the system.
Mm.
So I find it fascinating. So tell me more about what, like, when you say you got certified and you went back to school and to help your family, how does it work professionally and how do you support your clients?
Good question. Well, I would say, I would love to ask you first, if you could, what seems different about my approach? Because I think it predates the coaching school. I think the approach that I took with schools was probably the approach I should have adopted more with my own family. You know how we show up differently with others than we
Mm-hmm.
do in our own home. So I would imagine that my intuitive approach with the schools is probably what I should have brought home more. But from your perspective, what seems different to you? And then maybe I can elaborate.
Like you looked more on the data,
Mm,
which is really interesting because I feel like it's like you said, I'm coming from more of like a big picture, right? You're seeing the big picture and then you're looking at the data of what was happening,
hmm.
even for your own children, right, in the school
Yeah,
system. And you're not the only one. I
right.
mean, so this is really interesting for me because when I talk with advocates and sometimes, yes, educational lawyers, we're looking on case by case, right?
Okay, right.
So we are looking now systematically about what is happening. And I don't know because we are in different states. But the worst thing that we want our kids to feel is that school is prison.
Mm.
So that's very, painful, maybe even as a parent to go through that. And
Yeah.
also the frustration that the school doesn't know how to support my child.
Right.
Because they also have their own limitation. I mean, it's like you said, this teacher has this amount of kids, and she needs to, or he or they need to kind of support all of them. And it's a difficult job for them as well, and they're burned out too.
Yeah.
So that's really there are so many components to this.
Hmm.
So my question is um
Kind of
how
where to
did it,
start.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Um, what I would say to parents is you don't have to be an epidemiologist to kind of think big picture. You just walk into a classroom and you can sense that there are a whole bunch of needs. You can sense that there's a distribution curve at play, and some kids are engaged and some kids aren't. So that's the first thing to look for is who's engaged and who isn't. And then really understand who's not engaged, what's happening there. Get curious about what's happening there. Um, I would say I have kind of like a structured approach to how I think. And the first is to look bigger picture. Who are the customers we're serving? And so start at the district level and just understand where that district fits into the state. Maybe look at what is the state measuring for growth? What is the state measuring for different learning benchmarks? Growth is a high bar. And if we actually have in place a recognition that all students deserve to grow, while they're in school, then we actually have a wonderful foundation to start from because not all places recognize that. So go to your state. You're in California. I'm in
Yeah,
Virginia. I actually was in Washington State on Bainbridge Island, and the school district there, when my kids were very young, did the phenomenally, I guess, prescient approach of defining growth as a benchmark. And so all students should grow a year while they're an academic year while they're in school. The parents didn't really realize how wonderful that was to have as a tool in their back pocket, because then that means that, yes, the yardstick is growth for all, but we get to look at our own kids and we get to see where they're starting and are they growing. And so I just really want to hand it to Bainbridge Island for being well more than a decade ahead of most school districts. And if other school districts adopted that same mindset, we'd all be pulling in a similar direction and with similar energy and really looking for resources to support the kids. The other benchmark that most schools tend to use is minimum performance standards, like are our third graders reading on grade level?
yeah,
Well,
standard test.
right, that does nothing for most of the kids, right? That
Mm-mm.
just means are we clearing a bar? And it really does not allow a conversation around individual needs. So look at what your school district or your state is measuring. And I know California doesn't have anymore. They removed their gate standards for serving gifted kids.
They did.
Massachusetts, it's similar. They don't have any standards for serving gifted kids. I'm lucky in Virginia. Most people are lucky in their own states. They do have some legislation in place and some regulations in place that define what giftedness is and how those children should be served. So use your good research tools and go find out what is the So just be informed about what the school is measuring and what the regulations are, what the target is that the state has set for these kids. And that would be one place to start.
Yeah, yeah, I think like when I see the state testing, when I read them, it doesn't really give you too much information. Also, when you get it back, even as a parent, right? I got it in the mail, right?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so okay, so awesome. So my kids excel in XYZ, or they are below XYZ. So, but what is the XYZ? And what do you mean? Like it's below? So it's like the measuring. And I think when you and I talked before, we talked about how we measure
Hmm.
and why it's not really working very well when we serve
Right.
kids,
Right.
especially with state testing.
Right. It's really not. In fact, even identification of gifted kids is very problematic. And that's the other, I think, challenge for parents is yes, there are holistic ways of identifying kids. And I know you're an expert in this as well. I don't mean as well, I'm not really an expert. You're probably the expert, but I've been immersed in this for a long time and watched how different districts measure whether or not a child is actually gifted. And the challenge with these tests is they are developed by academics, psychometricians, and they don't necessarily approach students, gifted kids, the way that they think. Many gifted kids will overthink questions and they will come up
It's
with two
true.
possible answers that are right. And they'll take a long time thinking about these things. They may actually really love the test and really, it's probably the most interesting thing they've seen in a while. And so they're just immersed in it. I know I tend to overthink things. It's probably my least favorite description of me. I really hate that term, but our gifted kids do that, and so they may not even complete the test. They may answer, on the test you'll see like COGAT, for instance, you'll see X number of questions attempted out of a total. And so if they haven't even answered a third of the questions, then how are they going to score anywhere close to what their true potential is? So I think these screening tests are very problematic, and I really don't put much stock in them. And when my first kids started taking these screening tests in second and third grade, I was researching from an academic's perspective. So what is the sensitivity and specificity of these tests? Those are things we use in medicine, right? To figure out if you have strep throat or not, or mammograms, right? Like sensitivity is of all the people who have breast cancer, what proportion do we actually detect? True positives. And then how do we rule out that specificity? How do we rule out the people who don't have it so we don't do unnecessary procedures? These tests, these gifted screeners do not have that. There is no gold standard. And so it's very problematic because it's all devised by people who function well and think linearly about tests. And the really interesting divergent thinkers in our classrooms who are not being well served, probably not going to pop on these. And I've seen that time and again. Initially, I was kind of ashamed. I'm like, my kids didn't really test that well on these tests. Like maybe they're not actually gifted. And the more I researched, the more psychometricians I talked to, the more I heard that the further you are out, the more edge case you are, the less the test is actually going to find you. So I'm like, that's paradoxically really problematic. That's really a problem because the most divergent thinkers who are 4, 5, 6, 7 grade levels out of parameter for fourth grade math, say, are the ones we're least likely going to pick up like some profoundly useless test. So you really have to use parent intuition and scenarios and right for the portfolio to think about, okay, what are the conversations my kid is bringing up in the car when we're driving? What are the questions they're asking? Make a note of these. Like
Yeah.
literally make a note and remember how interesting they are and how differently they see the world because the test won't pick it up. I could go on, I'll stop there.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm like, I feel like I'm like going in a folder in my brain, like going through my students and like, oh my gosh, because even with my own child, but even for myself, with I don't know how well I will score, but I remember the entrance exam for university, right?
Mhm.
So it's we have something similar to SATs, and it's really about how you study for this. It doesn't really
Right.
measure your knowledge, and I scored very, very low. I couldn't get into so many things I wanted to get into, and then I mean, fine, whatever. So I did my own thing. I went on my own path, but I also had a learning disability that I didn't get accommodations. I was not diagnosed back then. And I scored horribly in the math section.
Mm.
And if I had some support, or it was not something that was measured for what I needed to get in. So I think that the problem is broader. And but on the other hand, so how do we um sift right through who can go to that um I don't know, how do you call it, like to this topic, to this, I don't know, profession, whatever. But also, when we are young, it's not really a way to measure things,
Right.
because we can do things and we can um there is nothing in our way to get what we want to do if you have a grit, right, and a growth mindset, and you're resilient,
Mhm.
and you have accommodations in place. And this is what I tell my clients: even if you are dyslexic, ADHD, and I have a client that I'm with him for like 5 years now. And he told me, I remember that he told me, no, I cannot write because I'm dyslexic and I'm dysgraphic and I have ADHD. And I said, this is not an excuse. I mean, we can use accommodations, but your and your vocabulary is so freaking amazing that, believe me, you can express yourself really, really well, even if I just type for you or we get, some kind of accommodation in place. But it doesn't mean you cannot get there. So what I'm trying to say is that we have so many like these tests to try to limit because the measuring is incorrect. And I think you're right. I think with this dude, if he had to take that test, I know that mom is like not doing state testing and she's correct. I would like get it out. You don't have to have your child, just to our parents, to take the state testing. And so I remember that in third grade, he didn't do it. Fourth grade, he didn't do it because mom said, no, we're not going to do that. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because this is not what is going to, and it's like you said, he will take his time and he will think because he analyzes everything. So
yeah,
it's true though. They have different way to see things. And I had a client that, she needed to write, she's a great writer. And every time she needed to write, they gave her this graphic organizer that she had to put things in, like rectangles, and she hated it because she said, this is very limiting. I don't want to do this. I don't want to write only 5 sentences. I have more to say. Or 7 sentences. I'm like, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I've raised boys who are very good at being efficient. And so they will figure out a way to cram as much as they can, information as they can, into like the fewest number of sentences that they need to either write or type. So you asked me how I support clients now, and I wanted to circle back to that because it's such an important question. I'm drawing on the experiences that I've had with school systems where we've had very good, productive relationships. And I'm trying to offer to clients, whether they're trying to work with their kids, with their spouse, with a boss, or with a school, it's all based on the same sort of appreciation for human relationships and an awareness of what the energy is that we're bringing into a situation. I work with horses, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and they are such fantastic mirrors of who we are and what kind of presence we're bringing. And just today, the redheaded mare I was riding, who's a little sassy and it's cold out, and she had just eaten. So those are some good ingredients for getting some sass. I wanted her to canter more slowly and in a more relaxed fashion. It's called a lope in Western. And I was like trying to help her get there. And like, you can go slower. It's really nice to go slow. I'm inviting her to go slower. I'm like, wouldn't you want to go slower? And she really wasn't. And it wasn't until like I relaxed my shoulders and let my chest just open. She felt that on me. She felt me breathing and then relaxed herself. I'm like, oh my gosh. I've ridden horses for many years, and I just have to remind myself that nonverbal cues are really important for them, and they're important for human beings as we relate to each other as well. So I remind people, this is the first A of the 3 A's I mentioned to you that I brought to our conversation, trying to be organized because otherwise I'm everywhere. The approach. Approach is important. How we approach people is important. What is our energy going into a conversation? Are we like, this has to be done or else I'm going to be really pissed, whether it's homework or whether it's, accommodations in school, we have a certain vision for what we want it to look like. If we're going in with a zero-sum game and we're only going to be satisfied if we get our way, the other folks are going to feel that before we even open our mouths, and it's not going to be great. So, as an energy coach, I try to support people in being aware of their energy and then consciously choosing a different energy to come in to the conversation with. And for me, when ask a horse to do things, it's more like an invitation. I can be I can be a lot. And so I really try to remember that like this is an invitation for us to go explore and try a different way. And let's be curious about how we do this. So curiosity is a big part of that is what is possible. Don't assume anything. Don't assume that you have even if we're going in with empathy and we're assuming that the teacher is overwhelmed and burdened and won't have time for us, that's limiting the teacher, even if we're trying to be kind. So empathy can put us in a box too. So just go in and create a field that is open and curious.
I like it. Love it. So how would you do that in an IEP meeting when everybody is so like,
And well, I mean, that's that's a challenge, but the same principle applies is be aware of your own energy, be aware of what has been going on in your own home and how that is impacting your child, and recognize that I think we talked about this in one of our first conversations is self-determination theory being so
yes,
critical. And for an IEP meeting, I think it would be interesting to bring that in. And I know you are a huge fan of SDT, but briefly, it's recognizing autonomy is really important for kids, for all human beings. Our gifted kids are maybe even their radar really up, looking for agency. So that first one is key. The second one is competence. How are they feeling with the work? Do they feel like they're able to do the work? Is it in that zone of proximal development that's so important, right? And then the third one is connection. Do they have a good connection with the teacher, with other kids, with their peers, and with their family? And let's get those foundations for human flourishing in place and approach it from that standpoint. I like alliteration. So the three for me that I try to remember are choice for autonomy. Do we have
yeah,
choice anywhere here for the young person? Competence and connection.
yes,
IEPs, though, are a real challenge. And so, again, I would go back to what is your authority? Go back to your state regulations, go back to your school district's manuals for parents, handbooks for parents, and go and see what and you talked about educational lawyers, go and see what your rights are and research some cases and just see what has been done elsewhere. Um, Frankly, I did not go that route with my kids. I did not want any labels attached to my kids. We didn't even get IQ testing. Frankly, we couldn't afford it when we were young military parents. And then as time went on, we had conversations with our kids about, you know, how is this actionable for you? If we were to go and get psychometric testing, um, what would we do with that information? What would change, if anything? How would we use this information? And they just decided, you know what, we're good. And I don't know if that is because we worked so hard to create an environment that was reasonable for them in school. We did a kind of a hybrid schooling approach and collaborated with the teachers, trying to reduce the harms and optimize in the good. That it really wasn't obvious what we would do with this sort of information, but I just did not want that. I didn't want to have what could become self-fulfilling prophecies about limitations. You were alluding to that before about I can't write and I can't do this and that. And when I work with clients, it is distressing to me to hear the self-imposed limitations. And it's understandable that it comes from a long history of being told this is hard for you because we're trying to make things easier for kids, but they really listen to what we're saying. And if we say, oh, this, we provide an explanation, but it can be, I think, very problematic depending on how the child is supported in pushing boundaries like you are doing with them, providing ways for them to actually overcome what is truly a challenge, but getting out into that edge of discomfort and seeing, oh, actually, I can do some things that I thought I couldn't do. You are so good at that. And leaning on their strengths to do that, I think is very important.
yeah. I just want to be clear for our listeners that we are not saying that accommodations don't have place here. 504 is extremely important if you are in the public school, and IEP if you need services for any kind of learning disability that is happening. I'm saying the word disability because it is by law. So I'm going to use the federal law words. And personally, we are talking from our personal experience and professional experience, which is also in the disclaimer of this podcast. Um, there are accommodations that their job is really to get the kids where they are, and like Allison say, push those boundaries that they think about themselves.
Mhm.
um, and and definitely use strengths. But the thing is, I have to be real and tell you that when we go to IEP meetings, I tell parents when I get them ready, you're not going to talk about how your child is amazing. You're going to talk about their challenges. So, because we can get some services, um, especially if they need an occupational therapy, or it's like you said, some of those things, it's so expensive to get IE or outside evaluation. It's not in many cases covered by insurance. So it can go to thousands and thousands of dollars. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, getting IEPs is important for resources, for sure.
absolutely.
But I would also say that, parents can do a lot by researching what an occupational therapist does, a play therapist does, and look online and see what
Mm-hmm.
they're actually doing.
Right.
Because you can bring that into your home. And you do
Yes.
not need to wait for the school to label your child to go and do what the child needs. So, like, I'm all about parent empowerment. And even when it comes to ADHD, parent behavioral management training is
Oh, yeah.
critical, right?
Absolutely.
As first line, even before bed. So I just think that sometimes younger parents, especially, I find that their self-concept as parents is not grounded in their authority as parents and the truly beloved first and most important teacher for the child. And I think
It's
younger
you.
parents
Yeah.
are filled with self-doubt and this steeped in this culture of credentials and expert knowledge. And it's unfortunate because parents really are, just by being present with the child and connecting with the child, part of the self-determination theory, so profoundly influential on the child's self-concept as a learner.
Yeah. It also goes with everything that goes with attachment, with
Yeah.
psychology.
Yep.
Um, I would say stay away from stereotypes, right? Because there is I understand that the challenges of fear of being a parent, and maybe it's your first child and they were just,
Yeah.
or maybe it's your second child and they were just diagnosed with ADHD, and you just thought, oh my gosh, everything that I thought they were doing was an excuse, right? But there's
Mhm.
actually a reason. So to the parents out there that have young children or older children, behavioral issues are a way of communication.
Yes. Unmet
So
needs.
yes, we need to understand what's going on.
Yes,
So there is an
absolutely.
underlying thing that's going on here that is beyond academic. And I always
Absolutely.
say academic you can fix. And I'm choosing the word fix deliberately because academic is something that you can fix. You can retake a test, you can do something else, and you
Hmm.
can choose a different path. Mental health, your emotional regulation is something that is going to be harder to support if your child have challenges.
Hmm.
And this is
Yep.
scary.
Well, both parent and child, right? Because of co-regulation. And I didn't mention I'm a professional ADHD coach too. So I immersed
Mm-hmm.
myself in that world in order to understand what's effective. And it's very interesting that ADHD clients say that emotional regulation is one of the five domains of executive functioning, is the one that
Yeah.
causes everything else to unravel.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to addressing emotional regulation gets back to physiology. It gets back to the things that are so hard to take care of, but so basic, like proper sleep, right? Proper nutrition, proper movement,
Yes.
being mindful of the dopamine, right? All the things that are dopamine device driven things that we just get locked into and are so hard to detach from. So those are the foundational aspects of providing good physiology that optimizes our ability to stay emotionally regulated. But it is so hard to do. Everybody tells me I have trouble sleeping. I don't want to sleep. I personally find sleep is boring. I didn't want to go to bed. So many interesting things to read. But if we think about what is actually happening during sleep, it is so important. And I find people resonate a lot with this. If you see road crews out where you are in California working on roads at night, we have a lot of construction going on here in Virginia Beach all the time. Those road crews are out in the middle of the night or working at night when theoretically traffic is less. That is exactly what our brains are doing during sleep. Growth hormones being released, right, to create neural pathways. Hormones are being released to go repair all of our tissues, and our joints are even being hydrated. The first half of the night is for memory consolidation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I
right?
was
And
waiting for the same memory.
file, you mentioned your file folders and thinking about things. So like that's the where we're putting things in our file folders so we can go pull them out later. And then the second half of the night, like the early morning during the REM sleep, is when we have skill building and emotional regulation. So just like if you wear one of these little watches, it
Yeah.
provides such a neat graphic, right, of sleep. And you could be like, oh, I can see my body battery charging. I can see that it's charging better when I go to sleep consistently and I don't eat a ton of sugar and stuff before bed. It really grounds it in a visual that is so useful for parents. And if parents can do that and enjoy it and see the benefits and then support their kids in learning these sorts of behaviors, you're setting them up for life with some really important skills.
And I would also, just to kind of, everything you said 100%. And I would also kind of say to that, uh, teach your child about sleep. Show them the
Yeah.
science. And you will be surprised, because if we just tell them, oh, because I said so, because it's time to go to sleep,
Right.
they're like, no.
Right.
But they will fight you. um, I'm not saying it's perfect solution, but of course we need to rule out any sleep apnea or any kind of like a medical thing that can happen, and also be mindful that a neurodiverse population might have something going on with their circadian rhythm. So it's something also
Hmm.
to think about.
And
Um,
need less sleep. And we definitely saw that in our family.
mm, isn't that interesting? So we are all different,
Yeah. Yep.
and um, and it's interesting you said that. I just released a podcast a while ago, the beginning of the new year, about nutrition, sleep, and movement with
Hmm.
Method 3 coach, like um, physical, exercise,
It's so
and
important.
it was like, yes, this is exactly what we check when we talk with families. Is your child, this is in the intakes, like every
Hmm.
intake is like, is your child sleeping well? Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Because this is the foundation of our
Yes.
functioning. And I feel like that if we kind of teach it to kids, especially to the gifted ones,
Hmm.
but not only, but if we give them this
Right.
information and show them the science, or do experiments, and if you can have one of those measuring, just like measuring thing on their hand
Yeah.
or the ring or whatnot, that's super cool for them to see how it is affecting them. And also just
Hmm.
try and experiment with sleep. Like, if I sleep this amount of hours, then try it for a week, how it is affecting me the next day.
Right. That's such a good point because these kids love to learn through experiential opportunities, right? And engaging their own minds and empowering them back to self-determination theory, empowering them to make choices for them. Because we really don't necessarily want robots. We want people who are able to make good choices for themselves for a lifetime and to see themselves as capable of managing their own bodies, right? So this is really important foundational practice for parents and for families to offer this sort of insight into how our bodies work, even for anxiety, getting into that because we can see how physiologically our body reacts to stress. I mean, if you go out and jump rope, right? That's a hard thing. Try to do that, like count to 100 while you're jump roping. And then try to do it with nasal breathing only versus breathing through your mouth, and you'll feel that your heart rate comes up pretty high. That's how you feel when you're anxious. Your heart rate comes up. And then if you teach them the physiological sigh, you're right, the deep breathing in, a little more at the top, and then a long, slow exhale out, we can re-regulate. It only takes about 3 breaths to come back down. So teaching kids how to self-regulate using their own bodies is so important.
I want us to kind of circle back to what parents can do with the school. And so, what does effective collaboration between parents and school look like, and how families can use the right language to advocate while supporting the child's self-determination?
Yeah. So the first approach was being aware of how we come in, right? What kind of
Yeah.
energy are we bringing in? And then we get into knowing your authority. And we touched on that earlier in your pod, just understanding what is the school measuring? What are your rights? What is the state measuring? How do we define giftedness? So setting that groundwork so you are informed about your authority and your rights. And so you can come in and be confident. The next A would be ask. How do you ask for what you need? And you should ask confidently for what your child needs, knowing that it is within your rights to ask. So uh, at least here in Virginia, time with intellectual peers. Bring in, literally in writing, what your state says is gifted education, and then ask, this is what is required for meeting the needs of gifted students. How is the school planning to do this for my child? How will you ensure time with intellectual peers? How will you ensure appropriate intellectual fit? How are you measuring intellectual fit? Are you measuring growth? How are you measuring growth? Many parents are surprised that they can actually ask for the data. You and I probably did that just automatically, going and gathering all the data that they do at baseline in September when they're trying to figure out where all the kids are, the Lexiles and the math readiness and things of that nature. So ask for that, or go in your school's electronic dashboard and look in the documents area or look in the testing area and see if your school already has that information for you, and study it before you go in so that you can ask, okay, when are you measuring this again? Do you do fall, winter, and spring measures? Say for MAP is one that California may use. I'm not sure. NWEA has a fabulous tool called Measures of Academic Progress, MAP. If the school uses that, it's awesome because it's on a vertical scale that is not limited by grade. So there's no ceiling. So you can actually see if your fourth grader is ready for algebra just by looking at that MAP score. And then it also gives you the ability to see if they're growing over time. So make sure that you have the baseline data. And if you don't yet have it, ask for that as a starting point. I like to tell parents to ask for it well before the meeting, email and ask for it well before the meeting. Don't just show up and get it there, because then your hands are tied. You don't have enough information to be specific about what you want for your child. But I think I would add, even parallel to that, know that you are a capable teacher yourself as a parent, and that you can offer your child what they need outside of the school. And in fact, you should see yourself as the child's primary educator and responsible for the child's formation, intellectual formation. Parents are responsible. We are outsourcing to the schools. We expect them to provide a service for us with our tax dollars, but very often the reality is they're not. They will say they can't. It's our job to advocate for the maximum service that they can provide. Back to your point about IEPs and 504s, there's a lot of avenues and strings we can pull, but we are the primary authority on our child's education. And we are capable and we can do that. And I know it sounds daunting to a lot of parents, especially dual income families who are mothers are working. Goodness gracious, how in the world are we going to do this? Well, you actually can. I found in our family, it doesn't take a lot of time to kind of dose. In medicine, it's called a bolus dose. When you give like 2 antibiotic pills the first day and then you only give one the next couple of days. If you bolus dose in a big bolus, 45 minutes of, appropriate math instruction, and then provide them with replacement homework. If the school is unwilling to bend and will not give your child appropriate homework or work to do in the classroom, well, you get it yourself. You figure out where are they, use one of the IXL or one of the many other ways to test where your child is on grade level or not, figure out where they are, and get the book. Get the book you want. Get the book of your dreams, the book that your child will love and actually do with you, and provide that instruction. One that we love is Beast Academy for ages 6 to 13. You know that one, okay. So that's a very different approach. It's a graphics oriented, it's conversation based, it's problem solving, it's honors, it's accredited by Western Association of Schools and Colleges. As you go up the grade levels, it's accredited in high school. So you can get high school credit. If your middle schooler is ready for high school courses, you've got high school credit there. You can put that on their transcript. I do recommend, and this is an important point, that you clear it with your principal first. If you have a middle schooler and you want high school credit on their transcript, clear it with the principal first, because they have to generally say, yeah, that's okay, and get it screened by someone in the district and approve it in advance. It just makes your life a lot easier. I think the challenge that I ran into is not all principals understand gifted education, and the principal really controls the school. The principal decides what happens in that kingdom within the school. And for many principals, thank goodness, that's great. We've had wonderful relationships with 2 principals I can think of. In other cases, that's really not great because like it's not easy to switch schools, and your child may have friends in your school. And if you have run up against a brick wall with that principal, it is going to be more challenging, but not the end of the road. You may still be able to find ways to collaborate and work with the gifted resource teacher and the teacher. It may vary by grade level. Hopefully you find a teacher that is willing to work with you. I know I provided a lot of information there. I want to make sure that I'm going in the direction you were hoping that I would go with that question.
Yeah, it's the same for the other piece, right? With the challenges. Many of our kids that are gifted will have challenges in the executive functioning.
Hmm.
And this is again something we can ask the school to help with. Many schools do have some kind of support. I know it's not something that is being taught per se, um, but there are things that can be done, even if it's like a check-in or something that can done discreetly between the student and the teacher.
Hmm.
But it does mean that in middle school and high school, they do need to advocate for themselves. And this is where it's kind of can be challenging because this is advocacy is not something that many kids are ready to do at this developmentally at this time in their lives. But it's a great skill to work on. Another thing is to definitely talk with your teacher and be curious and okay, how can you support my child? What is something that we can do at home? And we can work together as a team. We don't need to attack anybody.
Right.
And also, like you said, we are the parents and also have the understanding that there are things that clinically cannot be done in a school setting.
Yeah.
Um, an occupational therapy in the school is not a clinical occupational therapist that maybe have more niche of experience with sensory integration or emotional regulation, right? That can be done
Hmm.
through an OT or speech therapist. So there are things that need to it's like you said, you need to do your research as a parent and not just come like, okay, this is what is happening and this is what I got from the school, through the report with the IEP or 504 or whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, look on your rights. And if you don't know your rights, talk with somebody who does and work in your district, even if you need to pay for them.
Yeah. Get informed because that knowledge will, right, it will support you with your other children too.
Yeah,
If you have more
yeah.
than one child, odds are good the other children will have something interesting that is challenging for them with school. It may be radically different than the first child, but you'll still be that much more informed. And then hold the door open for other parents is something that I've always tried to do. So when I realize that I have the energy and the capacity to learn the language of education, and not all parents have that time, interest, energy, whatever. So if you have an opportunity to create a pathway for your own child, try to hold the door open for other parents. I find in the gifted community
Yes.
sometimes like it's unfortunate competition and
Mm-hmm.
identity fusion, the parent with the child and the child's achievements, it makes for a less communal sort of approach to the whole gifted community. And that's unfortunate when, some parents like kind of hold knowledge aside as special knowledge for them and their child and are not willing to provide support to the entire community because other parents and kids are out there suffering in their own ways. And we really need to work together as a community to support parents because raising neurodivergent kids is so exhausting. And it's such a joy, but it is so challenging. And parents often feel alone. They feel stigma. And I know in our case, when underachievement is part of the picture, when a child is not doing well in school and yet they're very bright, there's a certain amount of shame attached to that for the
Yes.
parent. And it's very, very hard to talk about. So for that's near and dear to my heart is underachievement is not something, back to your point about behaviors, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's a symptom
Mm-mm.
that school is not offering the right intellectual nutrition for the child. And we need to get creative about how we handle that, whether it's social and emotional, for a child who's on the autism spectrum or ADHD, maybe it's like too hyper stimulating to be in school every single day. And
Yes.
maybe by middle school and high school, when they have A days and B days, maybe we can go on campus on A days and work from home on B days using content that's not available in the school district, but that you've sourced and that aligns with the child's passions back to, their own autonomy. One thing that one of the parents did in our SANG groups, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, is create a matrix with her son when they were out school shopping. So she asked him, "What is important to you in school?" And then she came up with what's important. And they together, when they went looking around at 7 different schools, they scored these schools according to these criteria. And then he chose the school based on the most points aligned with that school. And he's doing so much better. He is so much happier. So I think anytime that we can really collaborate with our kids to figure out what it is that they really want and draw them out. Sometimes these kids, they have a hard time expressing what they really
Mm-hmm.
need and what they really feel. So we've got to be patient, use a lot of what words, a lot of open-ended, questions, and then try to create a matrix with them so that they can steer us in the direction that's really best for them.
I love it. That's such a great idea to use a matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time. My main issues with those schools is entry exams, especially with the private one, which is like, ugh.
Yeah.
Um, but this is a different topic.
Right.
Um, and when you and I talked, I just want to mention one more thing. Not just, yeah, open the door to other parents, but also volunteer in your school. I know many people parents work full time. There are different ways you can volunteer in schools. Most of the time, what happens, it's the same people that volunteer all the time. So it will be nice to have more parents volunteer, even if it's the school events or the garden. There are things you
Yeah.
can do. Bring your passion. If you're like in tech, do a tech night. I don't
Yeah.
know. There are things you can do, or just gather a few friends and do something. The kids love it. The teacher will adore you, and the principal will be like, "Oh my gosh, look what we bring to our school." So
That's
help the
such an
schools
important
shine.
point. Yes, absolutely. Get in there and work in the classroom and support the teacher and also learn the challenges that teacher is facing by being in there yourself, if they will allow that. And recognize I've started some volunteer programs with parents. Teachers want consistency. They want a commitment. They want to know they can count on you and they want confidentiality. So it's not a time for like conversation. You're in there to
Mhm.
provide a service to them. That's such an important point.
Yeah. Allison, how do we finish this talk? I can just talk with you like so many hours now.
Well, I think people should come and visit you and learn what you have to offer
Aw,
with respect to those
you're sweet.
all of those services and things that you're really an expert in. And my particular mindset is really honestly, what can we do ourselves,
Mhm.
without any external sources of, labels, medication, what is resident within us, our own capacity. That's my bias. And that's where I go deep in there to figure out where we have enough and we're sufficient. How can I empower parents and young people and adults and neurodivergent adults, anybody to find sufficiency within themselves and a full expression of their identity and full engagement in life. That's kind of where I come from. So I think we have like compatible strengths maybe, but different.
We do. Yes. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. It's been
I
such a
would love
pleasure.
to have you again and talk more about other things that you do because you're fun.
Thank you. And right, how to feed these hungry people.
Yeah, guys, we want to help. Yeah.
Thank you.